Good morning, everyone. Thank you for braving the cold weather to be here today. My name is Pema, and I manage the Endowment's Tibet portfolio, and it's my honor to welcome you to the NED. I'd like to start by recognizing our special guests today. We have Ambassador Brownback, the former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sikyong Penpa Tsering, President of the Central Tibetan Administration. Joining us all the way from India, Professor Hung-Sing Lau, historian and author of the book we will be discussing today, Sikyong Tsering, research head at the International Campaign for Tibet, and Josh Rogan, columnist at The Washington Post, who will be moderating today's panel. Thank you for participating in today's event. So we are here today for the launch of Professor Lau's extraordinary book on Tibetan history. We sometimes think of history as settled and distant, but this book reminds us that history is very much alive with real-world policy consequences. China knows history matters, which is why it rewrites history to serve its political ends. It tries to erase the events of Tiananmen from public memory and recast treaty commitments made over Hong Kong and reframe genocide in East Turkestan as development and stability. In each instance, history is not being told, it's managed, and Tibet is no exception. For decades, Beijing has told the world that Tibet has been a part of China since antiquity, and the international community has largely accepted this, allowing a historical falsehood to harden into unchallenged fact. To be clear, China's sole justification for its occupation of Tibet rests on a single assertion: that Tibet has been a part of China for centuries. If you strip away that assertion, China's entire claim collapses. And that is why this book matters. It challenges the very foundation of China's rule in Tibet, drawing on Chinese sources, no less. And the practical implication is that exposing this historical lie may alter China's incentives to negotiate with the Tibetan leadership on genuine autonomy. This and more is what our panel today will be exploring. Before I close, I'd like to share that in reading this book, I was struck not only by its content, but also how it came to be written. In his book, Professor Lau states that, like so many in China, he was taught that Tibet was always a part of China. Until one day, while in a debate with a Western scholar, he began to question his own beliefs and undertook his own research. He did what scholars are meant to do, but what authoritarian regimes discourage. He went back to the original sources to find the truth. And he found that what he assumed was settled history was in fact CCP propaganda. And that realization set him on a path of spending a decade of his life researching and writing this book. So Professor Lau, on behalf of all Tibetans, I'd like to thank you for your courage and dedication to the truth. It takes a rare willingness. It takes a rare willingness to speak truth to power, especially when that truth challenges a core claim of the CCP on one of its most sensitive topics. Lastly, the timing of today's event is especially meaningful. This year is the year of compassion in honor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who turned 90 in July. For over 7 decades, His Holiness's leadership has kept the Tibet issue alive, and his moral clarity continues to inspire millions around the world. We are proud to honor this year of compassion through today's talk, which is guided by the values of truth and justice embodied by His Holiness. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Damon Wilson, the President and CEO of the Endowment, to introduce our speakers.
Pema, thank you so much. And I think many of you know about Pema, but I just want to say a word because she's illustrative of the endowment's model and our approach. It's not about projects and grants. It's rather about teams here that know the language, the culture, the religion, that build relationships of trust over time, and that focuses on what it really means, what that impact is. And that's what today's event is about. And so our support for the Tibetan people at the endowment, it spans 30 years, 3 decades. It's among our longest programs, and as you know, among our highest priorities. And we're proud to be one of the democracy movements, or one of the Tibetan movement's most steadfast allies, because the Tibet movement is a democracy movement. I think that's the point of importance for us, and that the Tibetan movement, it can serve as a model, as an inspiration for freedom-loving people around the world. Led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan cause has long been associated with values of justice, compassion, and nonviolence. But at its bedrock, it also represents these principles of democracy. We have Sikyong Penpa Tsering here with us, who leads an administration that is a model of a thriving democracy in exile. It's a pretty extraordinary story. With 3 pillars of democracy, guided by a democratic constitution, carrying out free and fair elections, the Tibetan exile government is a remarkable achievement, and it is a model for many others who come to NED for advice. We suggest they talk to you. I was deeply humbled, along with Penpa, when we were last in Dharamsala and we had a chance to meet with His Holiness. And to be in the presence of a great figure is a moment I will never forget in my time here at the endowment. Someone who is beloved and revered leader around the world, certainly among the faithful. But what was really striking is that he had and articulated a vision to understand that by devolving political power into the hands of the Tibetan people through democratic institutions, that Tibet would endure. That's beautiful. And so in 2016, this institution awarded His Holiness with our highest honor, the Democracy Service Medal, to recognize his commitment to the cause of human rights and democracy. We did the same and honored in Sikyong on behalf of the Tibetan people in 2024, recognizing the Tibetan democracy movement, but also his personal contribution as a young man who was a democracy advocate from the beginning. So welcome back to the endowment. Welcome back to Washington. It's great to have you here. I'm just going to shout out Professor Lau. This is it is a monumental piece of work if you haven't had a chance. This is a serious body of work. It's remarkable. This is someone who was relentless about pursuing the truth when he understood that he was educated in a lie and dedicated a decade of his life to this work. And in many respects, the timing of this book, it gives life, it gives meaning to a big debate that we've had here in Washington, the work in Capitol Hill last year to pass the Resolve Tibet Act, which was sponsored by another NED board member, Senator Todd Young. You'll hear a little bit more about that, but rejecting the claims that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times and pushing for negotiations without preconditions. But this is also part of a broader global effort of support for Tibetans. There are a coalition of members of parliament around the world. The Canadian Parliament is debating how it could do the same, and we are going to be joined today by James Maloney. I think the weather has interrupted a little bit. He regrets he can't be with us, but he sends his congratulations to Professor Lau for this work. And he was here to represent, as a longtime champion of the Tibetan people, having hosted Tibetan leaders in Canada, to reflect the country's bipartisan commitment to preserving Tibetan language, religion, heritage by welcoming Tibetan refugees, and has worked inside the Canadian Parliament to have the Parliament affirm last year in 2024 that China is pursuing systemic cultural assimilation in Tibet and that Tibetans have the right to self-determination, that Beijing has no authority to interfere in the succession of the Dalai Lama. We're very pleased to have Puchung Tsering back with us of ICT. They've been remarkable advocates for Tibetans around the world. And Josh Rogan, welcome back. One of the most knowledgeable journalists on China, an author in his own right on this. It's great to have you lead this conversation. Shout out to Dean as well, Dean Baxendale of Optimum Publishing. He's given voice to those who have been targeted by the CCP, whether it's Rushan Abbas, who is with us, Dolkanisa, others, and now this monumental work. But it's a real treat to kick off this discussion today for all of you here in person, for our online audiences, with remarks from Ambassador Sam Brownback. We're really pleased to welcome you here in some capacity as our newest board member at the endowment, but also someone who has a decades-long track record on these sets of issues. And you saw, maybe some of you saw last fall when you were testifying, I think in November, before the Select CCP Committee, in front of another NED board member, Representative John Molinar, powerful testimony on China's war on religion. And Ambassador Brownback has been our nation's most powerful advocate for religious freedom. In some respects, we're here, what could be a scene setter for a big gathering on the International Religious Freedom Summit that will begin next week. someone who has spent decades in this as co-chairman, obviously, of the summit itself, chairman of the National Committee for Religious Freedom, and someone throughout his extraordinary career has kept this front and center. U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, working across regions and faith communities to confront persecution and advocate for the rights of believers facing state repression. But Ambassador Brownback also represented Kansas in the United States Senate, where he was the architect of the International Religious Freedom Act, served Kansas as a House of Representatives, as a governor of the state, one of only 6 individuals in our country to have served in all of these roles as a congressman, a senator, a governor, and ambassador. It is an honor to have you with us. Let me invite you to the stage, please.
Thanks, Damon. Very kind. Thank you, Damon. It's very kind of you. Pleasure to join you here today. Washington and snow just don't mix, and so I mean that you're out here. I'm impressed, and I'm thankful, and I'm very grateful. Damon, I'm very grateful for NED for doing this, for allowing me on the board of directors. I'm always questioning a group that would allow me to be a member of it, but the wonderful organization. They've done great work over a long period of time. My comments are short because the professor's book is why we're here, and I'm delighted, Professor, that you've spent and dedicated a decade of your life to document, to me, in a way, the obvious. Tibet is not a part of China. To me, it's no more a part of China than Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan were a part of Russia. Now, they folded them in, and they gave it a broader name, called it Soviet Union at the time when they were doing the takeover. But China just said, oh, no, you're Chinese. Well, no, we're Tibetans. And we should not allow this to stand, and yet for way too long we have. And we've just kind of said, well, okay, that's a fight we're not going to discuss today, or we're not just particularly interested in it. Well, no, it is time to discuss this. And in the heritage of my own state, this is our statehood day is January 29th, we were a state that came in to fight the lie of slavery. When we came in, actually, we were supposed to be a pro-slave state. We came in, fought, and said, no, we want to be an anti-slave state. And we're going to fight about it. But the United States, for 150 years prior to then, had just gone, we really don't want to fight about this issue of slavery. Let's just kind of figure out how to accommodate it. And you can do it in the South, and we're not going to allow it to expand here and there. But we just found this way to accommodate until finally some people said, no, we're not going to accommodate this anymore. And that's what I see this is. We're not going to accommodate this anymore. This was a military takeover when it happened. The Tibetan people are not a part of China. They deserve to have a free sovereign nation themselves, and sometime soon they will have a free sovereign nation of their own. This is the natural state of things. It's the natural state of what it should be in Tibet and East Turkestan. I could add that as well into this. And I think what we need to do is we need a relaunch of the Tibetan project. We've talked, and different people have talked about Tibet for some period of time. The Dalai Lama, when he was more globe-trotting, was a great spokesperson, traveling just in all the time, spreading really his sense and his vision and his capacity of Buddhism that was very appealing to a number of people, but also that was the hallmark and the measure of Tibet. But now he's not as capable of being able to do that and the traveling around as much. But he needs to be able to return to Tibet, to his home. And can you imagine what will happen in Tibet, in Lhasa, with the physical return of the Dalai Lama to Lhasa? I mean, to me, this will be the moment like Pope John Paul going and returning to Poland. The people will say, this is amazing, this is fantastic, this is the person that we've identified with, even after decades of trying to assimilate and put the culture down and make the culture Chinese instead of Tibetan. It's still there. And that's what they found in Poland. After decades of communism, of facial atheism, that Catholic center was still there. Once he showed up and said, "Be not afraid," it was over for the communist leaders. It was over when he said, "Be not afraid." And that's what I would say today to the Tibetan people. Keep praying. Be not afraid. Let's find and let's speak about truth. Let's call evil for what it is. The Chinese Communist Party takeover of Tibet has been evil. It has wreaked havoc on that nation and those people. It must be called out for what it is. And that's what I see us doing here today. God bless you all.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Everybody got here. Good morning. Thank you so much to Ned for hosting this event and for including me in it. My name is Josh Rogan. I'm with the Washington Post, and it's really my honor to be here with this distinguished panel talking about this important topic today. Let's start with a quick personal story about my connection to this issue. I first had a chance to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2017 in Dharamsala at the Tibet, CTA's 550 Forum. It's when I first met you, Sikyong. And it was just as the first Trump administration was beginning, and there was, like now, a lot of concern about this country and this government's commitment to the core values that underpin our shared mission to protect democracy, human rights, and autonomy for Tibetans. And I had a chance to ask His Holiness the Dalai Lama one question. So I asked him, "What do you think about America first?" And he thought about it for a second, and he laughed, and he said, "Well, the first time I heard the term America first, I thought, not so nice." And then he laughed again, and he said, "But I trust the American people, and I trust that they will stand up for democracy and human rights and Tibet." And it was in that spirit of sort of realism but optimism that I found a path forward for covering this issue, and I think that spirit encapsulates the conversation that we're going to have here today. Tibetans are facing an extraordinary challenge: how to preserve their identity, faith, language, and historical truth while adhering to a principled commitment to nonviolence. Even as the Chinese Communist Party intensifies the pressure campaign designed to not just to rule Tibet, but to erase Tibet as a distinct civilization. What we're witnessing is not just repression, it's cultural genocide. And Beijing's claim that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity is not an academic issue. It is the foundation for a policy used to justify surveillance, coercion, forced assimilation, and ultimately the assertion of state control over Tibetan Buddhism itself. And in this section of the Dalai Lama included in that. And that's why Professor Lau's book is so important. For those of you who don't know Professor Lau, he had a very long, distinguished career as a scholar, including a chair at the City University of Hong Kong. He then retired, but he didn't actually retire because he wrote a 1,200-page book. So that's not my definition of retirement, but technically he's retired. And this book is important for setting the record straight. And this conversation and this book are about the same thing, truth. But it's not just about truth, it's about what truth demands of all of us. And we're also honored to be joined here by Sikyong Penpa Tsering, who I've known for 10 years, who has dedicated his life to service to the Tibetan cause and the Tibetan people and Tibetan democracy in exile. Ambassador Brownback, who I first started covering as Senator Brownback, who, again, is having a very, very active post-government life defending the ideals and the principles that we all stand for. And, of course, my friend Bachung, who has also dedicated his life to the cause of Tibetan freedom, human rights, and autonomy. Let me start with you, Professor Lau, and ask you about this book. And my first question is, why did you think this was so important? What does the practice of establishing this very detailed narrative, especially based on Chinese sources, add to the conversation, and why is it so important that this story be told in this way? Thank you so much for coming here.
You want me to answer right now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, it can be said that the PRC conquered Tibet in 1950. And since then, the resolute position of the PRC has been the following. And that is, if the Tibetan government in exile wants to negotiate with the Chinese, the Tibetans have to first admit that Tibet has always been part of China since antiquity. And unfortunately, the Tibetans think it's just the opposite, and that is Tibet has never been part of China. So the question for most people is that why do these two sides remain so stubborn over an issue that is seemingly so obscure and so irrelevant? But the reason is that the Chinese, actually PRC, they have been condemning the actions, the imperialistic actions of the Western nations and of Japan through the years. And they also have persistently complained bitterly about how China has been treated by the Western powers and Japan in the past century or so. And so China cannot now turn around and simply just declare that today in 1950, the China army has gloriously conquered Tibet. Okay, it's just not acceptable anymore in 1950. So China has to frame it as the following, and that is Tibet has always been part of China, and in 1950, we have just normalized the relationship between Tibet and her motherland. And so it needs to be clarified as to who is telling the truth, the Tibetans or the PRC, and that's where I decided to write this book.
Excellent. Let me ask you a little bit about the sourcing, because one of the things the CCP always says is that these are Western narratives. But they can't say that about your book because it's all Chinese sources. How did you go about unearthing all of this new research? How long did that take? And why is that so important to use these specific sources?
Well, that's a very good question. I adopt as a Chinese who is educated in a Chinese school for 12 full years, from primary one to a high school. I take a completely chauvinistic approach in selecting my evidential records. I use only a evidential record if it satisfies all the three criteria. Criterion number one, the record has to be authored by a recognized Chinese scholar or by a Chinese government organization before 1949, before ROC came into being. And then criterion two is that the record has to be reprinted and republished by the ROC after 1949. The third criterion has to be that the third criterion is that the record can be verified by anybody in a good public library or a publicly available computer database operated by the People's Republic of China. And the reason why I take these three criteria is that number one, that would mean that the PRC cannot refute my evidence because it's basically their evidence. And number two, since 1950, the PRC government has publicized many fabrications and forgeries relating to Tibet history, and they need a credible way of proving that they have been telling lies. There's actually also another third reason, which many of you probably would disagree with me, and that is I think that the likelihood that anybody would get tough towards China on behalf of Tibet is pretty small. So I think that it is important for us to strive on convincing the Chinese people that what's going on right now is just
Fascinating. Have you gotten any reaction so far from?
Sorry.
Take your time.
No, actually, I haven't had any response from the Chinese government.
I have a feeling after this event that may change. Yeah. Sikyong, let me go to you next. Why is this? Please hit the button. Explain to us from your perspective why this type of work is so important to the work of not only the CTA, but the international community to advocate for Tibetan autonomy, Tibetan human rights, awareness of the Tibetan cause. Why is this historical, seemingly academic work directly related to all of the activity that you're engaged in?
Thank you, Josh. Before I respond to your question, I want to thank Wilson for organizing this. NED has been with not just the Tibetans, our Uyghur friends, and others who suffer under China. Thank you for doing this again. Dean, for publishing this book, having the courage to publish the book. He just not publishers, but he also authors books about the St. Edward Island that the Chinese have bought a lot of land in Canada. Yeah. They did some research and they also came out with a book on China's interference in Canada. Thank you for publishing this book. And Professor Lau, of course, for your courage to be able to tell the truth, even if you're a Chinese, and that your book has become a big tool for us when we advocate with governments. And Ambassador Brownback, we met for the first time last time at the Article 18 Alliance Conference in Czech Republic, and you have been very, very vocal about how you want a new Tibet policy. So thank you. Fujinla, of course, we have been working together. So for us, His Holiness has adopted this policy called the Middle Way policy, because His Holiness thinks for the interests of larger humanity. So he also appreciates the concept of European Union. That is why His Holiness says, if it can be applied to European Union, then why not Tibet with China? Because it's a larger interest of humanity and of the people. And even if whether we want it or not, we cannot lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere else around the world. So we have to live. We lived with Chinese, we lived with Indians, Nepalese, Bhutanese as neighbors for so many centuries. So whenever we get to go back, in whatever form, we have to live as neighbors. So then why not live in peace and harmony with each other? So when His Holiness talks about the middle way policy, then when you say middle, then there are ends to it. Without ends, they cannot be middle. So when His Holiness says middle way, he's talking about genuine autonomy. China already calls Tibet Autonomous Region, Tibet Autonomous Prefecture, Tibet Autonomous County, to all the 3 Tibetan provinces where Tibetans inhabit. But there's no real autonomy there. So that is why His Holiness is calling for genuine autonomy. And His Holiness expressed this in the form of 5-point peace proposal in 1987 to the US Human Rights Caucus, and then expanded on the 5th point on negotiation in 1988 in the Strasbourg proposal. So based on what His Holiness has proposed, and through our democratic process, the approval of the larger number of Tibetans who said that whatever, based on the changes in international scenario in China and in Tibet, whatever His Holiness decides, we will abide by that. The Tibetan Parliament in exile also unanimously supported this decision, and His Holiness reiterated his commitment to this middle way policy. So the ends, as soon as we came into this position, we decided to, of course, we have to follow the same policy of middle way, but we decided to change our strategy a little bit by focusing on the ends where China distorts Tibetan historical narrative. So one was to focus, the one end is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, and the other is the present situation of occupied Tibet under the repressive communist government. So to find an middle way. So that is why it's important for governments to recognize the ends to gain value for the middle way. If the ends are not recognized, then there's no value for middle way. That is also the reason why China does not respond to all this. So China's false narrative on Tibetan historical narrative, I think, is countered by Professor Lau, based on Chinese imperial historical records. And then if I may recommend another book by Michael van Walt van Praag, who is an expert on international law, same project supported by NED, called Tibet Brief 2020, which talks about the legal perspective of Tibet, pre the formation of United Nations and the international legal order after Second World War, and the status of nation states before that in different regions of the world. So these two books combined together, Professor Lau's and Mike's book, these two books I carry with me all the time, and ask governments to please read Tibetan history. So just don't listen to what Chinese government is telling you. So we request governments to, that is why we worked with the US Congress, where Wilson referred to the Resolve Tibet Act, which was passed with a huge majority in both the House and the Senate, and signed into law by President Biden in 2024. So this talks about countering China's false narrative on Tibet, now which has become a US government policy. So for us, this is very important to bring China on the negotiating table to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict. Unfortunately, China keeps calling His Holiness Dalai Lama a separatist all the time. Separatist. And I keep telling the Chinese government, who really wants Tibet to be separated from China? Because His Holiness always talks about the middle way, the middle way, middle way, middle way. That is why I was reflecting on what Ambassador Brownback said in Czech Republic and also at the CCC hearing, that if China does not respond within a certain period to His Holiness middle way policy, then the United States should reconsider, consider Tibet as an independent nation. So that is how Professor Lau's book has been very, very useful in convincing other governments that Tibet has never been part of China legally or historically, because we have to fight with the international community based on truth and justice, and that can be done only through historical facts and truths.
I understand.
And the international legal order.
Thank you. Yes, we have to. If there's to be an honest negotiation, it has to start from a shared reality and a shared history that's based on truth. I understand. Ambassador Brownback, I'd love to ask you about how this work relates to the overall issue of the Chinese Communist Party seeking to essentially control Tibetan Buddhism. They have a state system of sinicizing the religion and the religious experience for Tibetans inside Tibet. And what is your view on that? And how does this kind of research help combat that narrative?
Well, the research gives the base of truth here. Tibet is not a part of China. The sinicized campaign really, actually, it humors me at times in that, the real carpetbagger in China is communism. Communism is a European industrial era policy development. And, why don't you sinicize communism? Maybe they think they have, I don't know. But I want to go back to Professor Lau's statement that he says, with sadness, that I don't see major powers really stepping up on this issue. And that troubles me because for some period of time, I'd come to much of the same conclusion. It's remote, you're taking on a big dog here to do something like this. This is going to be hard. But now you've got China leading the axis of evil in the world, confronting the United States. We're back in a big Cold War, and it's not cold anymore. It's hot in Russia and Ukraine. It's hot between Israel and Iran. There's an axis of evil, and it's coming for us. We're the ones they're after. They're after to change the world order. And as your predecessor once told me, either the world will change China or China will change the world. So we're either going to go towards a more open set of societies or we're going to go towards totalitarianism and communism around the world. It's going to move one way or the other on this, and they're coming for us. Our most effective tool against the Chinese Communist Party is freedom of religion. They fear that, the Chinese Communist Party fears that more than they fear our aircraft carriers or our nuclear weapons. Because it means the people will seek freedom. As I mentioned, if the Dalai Lama goes home to Lhasa, it's over for China. If the Uyghur people are free to be the most majority Muslim that they want to be, it's over for communist China, an officially atheistic country. That means our policy and the West policy should be to support these religious freedom efforts around the world. And I've got a policy recommendation. I think we say to China, you either recognize the Dalai Lama's middle way approach within 6 months, or we're going to recognize Tibet as an independent sovereign nation and the government in exile as the true legitimate government of Tibet. You choose, 6 months. I don't think the middle way approach works as much as I have respect for the Dalai Lama, because I look at Hong Kong today and the threats towards Taiwan. I don't think true sovereignty within a communist China works. If it were a democratic China, I think this is a different case. But I think we give them 6 months and say, then we're going to recognize the sovereign. So that you got to have some actual teeth in this. Words will not work with the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you. Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure that the Trump administration is going to set that deadline right away, but I get what you're saying, that without pressure, there can really be no movement. And I guess that brings me to you, Bajong, because as we've heard, the Resolve Tibet Act shows that, in fact, there is strong bipartisan congressional support for Tibet. And that is a good thing. And so, but at the same time, we live in a world where things that are on fire make the news, and nonviolent movements struggle for visibility and attention, especially in our political system, especially in Washington. And so I'd like to ask you, how do you see the current Washington climate for advocating for Tibet? What is the next agenda item after the Resolve Tibet Act that people in this room, people watching at home, can get behind? And from your perspective, how does Professor Lau's work setting the historical record straight aid the lobbying and advocacy effort here in Washington, but also in other capitals around the world?
Let me mention 3 points with regard to this question. First, this book and Resolve Tibet Act are different in their framework. The Resolve Tibet Act, to me, is a political legislation that has a political agenda. But your book, I think, is more than a temporary political agenda. It has a long-term benefit, not because of whatever the Tibetan struggle is about, but because of what the international community considers as nation state and how Tibet fits into that criteria. So that's why it's important, irrespective of which government is in power in China. For example, as much as we want to blame the communists, even the nationalists didn't agree Tibet to be separate from them. They had claims over that. Even beyond that, the Qing, if you go beyond, they always had claims. But the Tibetan people did not have the wherewithal to sort of point out all these things in a way that the Western concept appreciated. So therefore, this book becomes important. So coming back to this, the atmosphere in Washington, D.C., if there is a silver lining in whatever is happening in Washington, it's that the administration and the Congress continues to be wanting to be doing or to do something on Tibet. They're trying to find ways of doing that. But given that everything is in a chaos, I think there is effort from very considerate individuals, both in the administration and on Capitol Hill, who wants to find ways to do things. So to them, this book also helps in that process, because the Tibetan issue is not a matter of just a temporary rights of a few Tibetans or 6 million Tibetans, 7 million Tibetans, whatever it is. It's about what Tibet brings to the international community. And that will not change whether this administration changes its policy or whether the Chinese change their policy. That's why the Dalai Lama represents the positive values that Tibet can bring to the international community and to the world. As much as we want Tibet to be safe, because for the Tibetan interest, it's for American interests to work for Tibet. And therefore, in the coming period, after the Resolve Tibet Act, the effort in Washington, D.C. is how can we strengthen the existing support that we have here, the bipartisan support and the support in the administration through different administrations. How can strengthen that so that in future, if the Chinese authorities don't have sanity to resolve the issue of Tibet during the lifetime of this Dalai Lama, there are enough tools available to the Tibetan people and the Tibet movement. The Resolve Tibet Act there becomes one tool, and on the other hand, this book becomes another tool which can tell the Chinese, convey the message to them that the Tibetan issue will not die away, even if they think after the passing away of this Dalai Lama, there will be no issue.
Excellent, thank you. Before we go to the next round, I just want to let the audience know we will have some time for questions, so start thinking about them. I would like to pick up exactly where you left off with Professor Lau. We're facing a moment that's coming, hopefully not soon, but it's definitely coming, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama will shed this mortal coil and then be reincarnated. And that will set off a policy and political crisis where the Chinese government will recognize a fake Dalai Lama in China, and the Tibetans in the diaspora will recognize a genuine Dalai Lama outside of China. This book seems to be relevant to that because it establishes the historical record that will set the debate. But I want to ask you to give us your impression, your opinions about this debate over reincarnation and succession, and what do you think is the best approach to thinking about that issue and then dealing with that issue, knowing that this is going to come to a head, hopefully not soon, but eventually someday.
How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
Well, in short, the PRC's claim is just totally without historical basis, and it's just a bunch of lies. Now, this is just not very credible, what I said. So let me go into deeper. That's the reason why I asked you how much time do I have. Well, one sad thing is that...
Take as much time as you need. We're here to hear from you.
One sad thing is that today you come to a country like England or the United States, and you're looking at a Christian, and then the person says, I'm a Christian, but I've never heard of the Bible, and I don't care to read the Bible. And you would find it very hard to believe. You probably don't see such a person around in the United States, okay? But in China, the problem is that we have such a thing as the official history of China, okay? And we have such a thing as the imperial records. And sadly, a lot of the Chinese, not only they have not read it, they have never heard of these things. It's like talking to a Christian who says, I've never heard of the Bible, or a Muslim that says, I've never heard of the Quran. You say, what? Okay, so my emphasis is that if you go to the imperial records, okay, which are actually recognized by the historians of the Chinese today as most authoritative records, I'm not saying that they are truthful. I'm saying that they are authoritative, okay? There's a big difference between something that's authoritative and something that's truthful.
Sure.
Regardless of whether it's truthful or not, your official statements, the authoritative official statements, okay, there's nowhere that says that China has the right to select and recognize the Dalai Lama. Yeah. The only place where there is official statement is that the Chinese Emperor Qianlong gave a golden urn to the Tibetans and wanted the Tibetans to draw lots from the urns from several candidates, okay, and then pick one out as the Dalai Lama. That's it. Okay, that's the only right is that I will give you a golden, or rather you
That
will
was
give me
for
a
the
golden.
fifth Dalai Lama, the fourth?
Well, no, actually
Eighth?
it was in 1970. That's the reason I asked you how much time to have. But it's a
Okay,
long story,
well-
okay? The Nepalis
Yeah.
invaded Tibet. It's like some burglars, robbers came to my backyard and stole my oranges. I'm from California. So stole my oranges, okay? And then took over a corner of my backyard. And then my neighbor came in and helped me to kick out the neighbor. The neighbor came in and helped me to kick out the burglar who took over my backyard and my orange trees. And then say, now that I've helped you to kick them out, I want to take over your entire household. Your wife is mine, your children are mine, and so forth. Okay, that's what happened actually. Okay, when the Nepalis came and occupied some of the border areas in Tibet, the Qing army came in and expelled the Nepalis and turned around and told the Tibetans that now you are part of us. Okay, and then of course the Tibetans say what? Okay, but then in the process, to sort of stick the foot into the door, the Chenrong emperor in 1793 said, I'm going to give you a golden urn, and you draw lots from the golden urn from the small children that you people go around selecting. So you select a number of finalists, and then instead of you making the final decision as to who would be the Dalai Lama, you would put the names in the lots into the urn, the golden urn that I give you for free. And then after that, that's how the Dalai Lama will come about. That was it, okay? So actually, I thought, it was a good deal. Somebody give you a golden urn for free, and then it's made of pure gold, okay? And but that's it.
So the point is that there's no historical basis for the Chinese government to be involved in a real way.
Yeah, and there's no legal basis either, because
recognized-
even the Chinese government never asked for permission or rights to identify. All you can do is to use the urn that's given by the Chinese emperor to draw lots.
Got it.
That's all.
Got it. Understood. Sikyong, let me ask you a similar question. Now we have the Panchen Lama was kidnapped as a child about 30 years ago. We still don't know where he is. We don't know if he's alive or dead. There's a fake Panchen Lama traveling the region, and for sure the Chinese Communist Party is going to have the fake Panchen Lama recognize the fake new Dalai Lama. What's the plan, and what do you think will happen, and what can the people in this room and in this town and in this country do to support a just and true succession?
The Chinese government has been preparing for the demise of this Dalai Lama for more than 2 decades. They've been preparing. They passed law called Order Number 5 in 2007. So earlier than they've been preparing. And if you look over the last few months or the last 1 year, what has been happening inside Tibet for the first time, Xi Jinping and 2 other Politburo members came to Tibet just after His Holiness announced on his reincarnation on July 2nd. So in September, they all came. This is the first time so many leaders are coming together in Tibet. And there have been teachings by the Panchen Lama, approved by the Chinese government, Kalachakra and all that, to try to legitimize, from their perspective, the fake Chinese appointed Panchen Lama. Even the process of golden urn that Professor Lau mentioned was practiced to choose the Chinese Panchen Lama. And we all know that it was misused. We have evidence, people who live in America who authored book on how the selection was done and how it was misused by the Chinese government to select their own candidate. So the Chinese government will most probably keep doing that unless some sense come into their head that this is not the best way to move forward. But I keep saying that if there are 2 Dalai Lamas in future, it'll be a lifelong headache. The present Chinese leadership will not be there to resolve it. So what we have been doing here outside Tibet of course, Chinese government is three positions. One is that His Holiness should be, they will look for the reincarnation within China. So which means the Chinese government is ordering His Holiness not to be reborn outside. So, of course, it's His Holiness who's going to be reborn. He has to decide where he is going to be reborn, not the Chinese government who decides where His Holiness will be reborn. The second is the golden urn, which Professor Lau just mentioned. And they say, oh, you have to, by tradition, you have to use the golden urn. So there have been 8 Dalai Lamas before the golden urn. So what about those Dalai Lamas? Were those not chosen through traditions? And even if that was to be used, it was not used during the 9th Dalai Lama, which came immediately after 1793, Professor Lau is talking about. And it was seemingly used for 2 Dalai Lamas, even after he was selected through religious traditions. The 13th Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, the golden urn was never used. And the third position of the Chinese government is that the Chinese government has to approve. So right now, what the Chinese government is trying to do is try to legitimize their Panchen Lama within Tibet. He has been staying for longer periods inside Tibet, giving teachings. So those preparations are going on. What we have been trying to do outside Tibet in the international arena is to, of course, the first community that gets impacted is the Tibetan community. So we have support of the whole Tibetan community and all the religious leaders of different traditions who live here in exile. Of course, when His Holiness, when we celebrated His Holiness' 90th birthday, just before that, when His Holiness made the statement on 2nd July, that was on the first day of the religious council meeting that the Religion and Culture Department had in Dharamsala, and there was unanimous decision to support His Holiness' statement. This is important for us. Whether it's important for the international community or not is a different matter, but it's important for us. So we did that. Then the larger community is the Tibetan Buddhist world. You have the Himalayan Buddhists, you have the Mongols, the Kalmyk, Buryat, Tuva, and the Russian republics, and so many new adherents. So they have been making statements, so we collected all this. And for the first time, last September, there were representatives from 12 East and Southeast and South Asian Buddhist countries came to Dharamsala to offer a long life prayer to His Holiness and conferred His Holiness the title Supreme Patriarch of the Buddhist world. And then with nations. The United States already have this law called Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020, wherein they have they included the element of His Holiness reincarnation, including sanctioning officials who would be responsible for doing such act in future. Then we reached out to UK, to Germany, and other countries, and UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, Iceland, Estonia, and Lithuania, the human rights ambassadors of all these countries jointly issued a statement on His Holiness reincarnation on July 6th, on the 90th birthday of His Holiness. And Ambassador Brownback was, of course, he formed the Article 18 Alliance, Freedom of Religious Belief, and this time the focus was more on Tibet in Czech Republic. President Peter Powell also came. It was held at the Presidential Palace. And the declaration of the Article 18, which represents about 39 different countries and 5 observers, also issued a very clear statement on His Holiness. So that is what we have been trying to do from the Tibetan community to the international level. Of course, we have to reach out more and get more support. And wherever we don't have government support, if we get parliamentary support, parliamentary group support, even Tibet support groups, those means a lot to us. This expresses what the free world wants about His Holiness reincarnation, not what the Chinese government wants about it. So we are preparing ourselves
and
in
what
our
the
own
Tibetans
way.
want.
Yeah, and most importantly, what the Tibetan wants, and
Thank
of
you.
course, what His Holiness wants to
Right,
decide.
that too.
It's He who is going to be reborn, so He has to decide.
Thank you. I understand. Ambassador Brownback, did you want to say something quickly?
I want to add something to what the Sikyong has just mentioned. Just
Please.
to emphasize once more, according to the Chinese imperial records, contrary to what the PRC people are saying, is that historically, China never had and never asked for rights to interfere with the selection of the Dalai Lama. the finalists, okay, had to be selected by the Tibetans themselves, specifically by the oracle priests. There are 4 oracle priests, okay, that actually specified in the Chinese imperial document. And also, after the lot was drawn, the winning, okay, the finalist was in the urn, and then when the Dalai Lama is recognized by the lot drawing ceremony, China has no right not to recognize that. You have to recognize it. It's by the process of this divine, whatever you call it, nature. So anyway.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Benson Brownback, I want to ask you about something that the Sikyong just mentioned, which is often forgotten about here in Washington. It is, according to the law passed in 2020 as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, the official policy of the United States government that the succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a matter to be determined by the Tibetan government in exile and not the CCP. President Trump signed that law. I don't know if he was aware of it, but he signed it. And President Biden's administration reaffirmed that policy. You were in the first Trump administration, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here and ask you to give us a frank assessment of this administration's approach to this issue and what to expect. On the one hand, we see the administration in a position of deal-making with China right now. On the other hand, we have officials in the administration like Secretary of State Rubio who have decades of experience and commitment standing up for Tibetan human rights and autonomy. So where are we? What can we expect from this administration? We were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think you're the perfect person to help us have, again, a sober, realistic, but perhaps optimistic view of where U.S. policy is headed.
I flew to Dharamsala and announced the Trump administration position that we support the Tibetans picking the next Dalai Lama and not the Communist Party of China. And that was the policy. I believe it is and continues to be the policy. You're in this period of time where President Trump's trying to cut deals with Xi Jinping, trying to get Xi Jinping to be more open, less attack, not be the axis of evil. It's not going to work. Xi Jinping isn't going to change. And then you're going to be right back to really this much more pointed policy. It's my estimation of what President would like to see this worked out. But I mean, the old saying of a leopard doesn't change his spots is certainly, I think, true with Xi Jinping. And he's shown it. This government, I've written a book now, it's coming out in May, on China's war on faith. The Chinese Communist Party has killed more of its own people than any regime in the history of humanity. There's nobody else even close that's killed more of its own people. Now, I'm including in that Tibetans and East Turkestan, but of Han Chinese. And we continue to treat them as a kind of a legitimate player. And they've got 3 genocides going on right now. One against the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, who they loathe, and the cultural genocide in Tibet right now. Where's the movie? Where's the Hollywood movie on this? The last one Hollywood did to criticize China, you might guess, probably a lot of this crowd would know, 1997, nearly 30 years ago. And for a lot of Hollywood concern for the Dalai Lama, where's the movie? It needs to come out, and now's the time to do that. These have cultural and global impact.
Dean, can we get the movie produced? Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Let's go to questions, unless you have something quick to add about the current state of the U.S. Policy toward Tibet. Which one could I give you the opportunity to say a couple of words? And I do want to get to questions as soon as possible.
I think I can add one point. Basically, for this administration or any American administration, for that matter, any government, they should look at this book not from a political perspective, but from the perspective of what was Tibet in the past. Their policymakers, their analysts should be able to read this book and then come up with recommendations. Oftentimes, analysts come up with recommendations based on what the popular narrative is of that time, and then they forget that the issue remains unresolved. So if they can do that, this will really be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you.
So first, I just want to thank the National Endowment for Democracy. I think this is the third event that we've done with NED. Thank you so much for your continued support for our authors, elevating their voices, because oftentimes those who are willing to come forward do not often get the opportunity to bring it to light and bring it to a global audience. Optimum has tried to do that. And once again, I want to repeat, Tibet was never part of China since antiquity. I also want to express my gratitude to the Central Tibetan Administration, especially Sikyong Penpa Tsering, whose leadership continues to inspire Tibetans and allies around the world. To my own Optimum team, thank you for your dedication in bringing forward voices that matter in the global struggle for humanity, dignity, and religious freedoms, and to highlight that the Chinese people are not free under the Chinese Communist Party. We also honor the support of James Maloney, Member of Parliament from Etobicoke Lakeshore, who obviously couldn't be here, and actually his plane was canceled this morning. And I also want to commend him for his support in Canada. We will be doing a book launch in Canada with MP James Maloney when the weather's better, because Professor Lau doesn't like to travel in the deep freeze. However, it must be some kind of joke, I guess, today here in Washington. So friends and people and nations, when we stand together against tyranny, history shows that the people will win. I'd encourage you to purchase a copy of his book, share it. Let us equip us all with the collective advocacy for the people of Tibet and other oppressed groups and freedom for all. Autographed copies are available right now. And thank you. Have a great day. May you all go in peace. Thank you.